One of the potential models would have been the model of a male and a female god in balance and partnership, which would, in my opinion, have been a much more healthy model for the development of history for the past 2,500 years. And a healthier model might have been an understanding that divinity is rooted in the natural world, that we respect the natural world. That's really what divinity is. Everything we depend on is in the natural world. It's not in an afterlife. It's not in heaven. It's here. We need this world. It is everything that we need. And if we had never lost that awe and reverence for it, then I think perhaps we would be in a better place today.
Okay, so here we are with Nikki Marmery, the author of Lilith. So I have it here. It's the ebook version because the book's not out yet, because it's going to be out in October, right? You confirm? Perfect. I love that cover so much. I'm going to buy it as soon as it gets out. So first of all, I want to say that Lilith is a mythology, like a retelling, but not the usual mythology, like retelling we're used to. Like we usually get to read Greek retellings or stuff like that. But this one, of course, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It's an Hebrew retelling, some religious stuff. And this was my first time reading something like that, which I really appreciated. But I want to give you the chance to present it. So can you tell us something about Lilith?
So Lilith, the medieval Hebrew myth of Lilith is that she's the first woman, the wife of Adam. Before there's Adam and Eve, there's Adam and Lilith. And she demands equality. She insists that she's been created equal to Adam. And for that, she is punished. She utters the ineffable name of God, and she is chucked out of paradise for daring to claim equality. And thereafter, she becomes this demonic figure who, takes her revenge by attacking children and babies. So that's the medieval myth. But Lilith is also a much older archetype. She sort of dates back to, perhaps as far as 5,000 years ago in ancient Sumer, where she's this sort of demonic figure. And so she appears, in different times and places. She has this sort of demonic aspect, which is usually linked to her. But really, that wasn't really the start of this book. What the start of this book really is about the loss of female divinity. The idea that we have a father god who creates life without a mother. And really, it's about kind of my reaction to, observing that all my life, this idea that we have a father god, the sun, this is a very obviously, male-focused religion. And because, I'm very, very interested in ancient history, so I know that for thousands of years before the arrival of this sole male god, people did think of God as a woman for the obvious reason that women bring life into the world. So the origin of the book really is my reaction to what happened to that mother, what happened to this mother goddess that was worshipped for thousands of years. Where did she go? What happened to her? And that's really what the sort of opening chapter of the book of Genesis is all about. It's all about the sort of erasure of that mother. She's being sort of removed from the story. These symbols of that story, the fruit, the tree, these are all very ancient symbols associated with a mother goddess because she is the source of all life. She is fertility. And even the snake, the snake is a very ancient symbol of wisdom, which is also associated with the mother goddess. So that was really the start of the book. That's what I wanted to write about. And Lilith seemed to be a really good device for getting into that story because she represents, womanhood as it should have been. The equal woman. She was created equal, whereas Eve is very definitely not created equal. Eve is created from Adam's rib. She is subordinate to him. And if that, wasn't clear enough, along God comes and he announces, he shall rule over you. So I wanted to explore that story through Lilith and have Lilith be sort of furious, as indeed I am, as indeed many women are, at that loss of equality. And so I wanted Lilith to be the sort of the prime engine through which we would sort of look into this story. So that was really the sort of origin of the book, and that comes from my whole life, really, sort of observing how religion works, how it works to limit women, how it works to sort of prioritise the male perspective all the time, and what that has meant for women. And that's really what I wanted to explore. So, and that's kind of why the book takes quite a sort of a different approach to the myth of Lilith, because we, you know, the main parts of her story which come from a medieval myth, you know, those parts of the story I've been faithful to, which is that Lilith is, you know, chucked out of paradise. She grows wings. She becomes sort of not an angelic figure because she's demonic, but she has wings. She goes to the Red Sea. These three angels come and try to get her to go back to paradise, and she refuses. And from there, that's kind of where my story goes into a different direction, because what I wanted Lilith to do was to explore this mystery. What happened to the mother? Where has she gone? What are we going to do to bring her back? And that's really what my story is about.
Yeah, and I think you did a brilliant job, also because you managed to give Lilith also sort of like adventure, because she's like doing this this trip to discover what really happened, and she goes through a lot of epochs. She starts in Eden, of course, so paradise and so on, and then comes to the earth, even if it's not necessary for her choice initially. But I think we discover like a lot about what women have gone through in different epochs and ages, and that was really interesting. So as you said, you approached different themes about women, such as oppression in different ages, because we get to see that as well, and the quest for justice, because that's one of the main themes for Lilith, and also the desire to restore balance in the world, which is what she tries to do for the whole book. So what messages or reflections were you trying to convey through Lilith's story for like the readers, because that's what the book comes to at the end, you know?
Well, I wanted people to look again at this sort of really foundational story of our culture, of the whole of Western civilization, really. And I wanted people to sort of think again. I think we're so used to this story, we don't really think about it. And I wanted people to reflect on, you know, what are we telling girls when you tell girls that, and boys, but how does it feel for girls in particular to feel, you know, when you're telling them that creation is something that a father does without a mother, that he ordains man as superior, women as inferior, that man is created in God's image, but women are, you know, created from his side. They're merely an inferior version, and a wrong version. You know, man is the default human, woman is sort of deformed in some way because she's taken from his rib. What are we saying in this story when we say that women seeking knowledge is a sin? What are we saying when we say that women, you know, as a result of what Eve did, that women are gullible, that they're easily seduced, they're open to temptation, they're dangerous, they must never be listened to, must never lead, must never have power or authority over men? You know, these are the lessons of the opening pages of the most powerful book that there's ever been. And you know, that book was taught as that story is not just a myth. It was taught as fact for millennia. You know, even when I was growing up, you know, these stories were told to me. They weren't told as myths. They were taught to me as facts, and you could, you know, take them or leave them. But somehow they still, you know, you can see the obvious absurdity of them, but still those messages are being reinforced. You know, to the point where, you know, we swear on this book. You know, if you're in court, you know, you swear on this book. that has these stories in it, these stories that sort of are the foundation of male supremacy. And I think we gloss over that a lot. I think we just sort of accept that's the way it is, or the way it was, and that we don't really think about it. And I think we really should think about it. I wanted to draw people's attention to what is being said, in the opening chapters of Genesis. That man is given all power over women and also over the natural world, which is another big problem that we're still sort of, we're dealing with the consequences of that today. The idea that man has control and power over the natural world, that has kind of led us to the situation that we're in, where we are in an ecological crisis now. And I wanted really to draw people's attention to the fact that that wasn't inevitable. That wasn't the only way things could have gone. There were other models available. There were other models of religion available. There were other models of authority and power. And those other models, included female divinity. They included a mother goddess who had very different aims and intentions to a male god. And one of the potential models would have been the model of a male and a female god in balance and partnership, which would, in my opinion, have been a much more healthy model for the development of history for the past 2,500 years. And a healthier model might have been an understanding that, divinity is rooted in the natural world, that we respect the natural world. That's really what divinity is. Everything we depend on is in the natural world. It's not in an afterlife. It's not in heaven. It's here. We need this world. It is everything that we need. And if we had never lost that awe and reverence for it, then I think perhaps we would be in a better place today. So that's really what I wanted people to look at. I wanted to talk about how different the world might have been had we gone down a different route, and how different a situation we would be in now, sort of especially with regards to the health of the planet, if we had gone down another road. And those are big parts of the book, as well as the themes about misogyny and women. Is about the natural world as well, and what we have lost when we lost that sort of awe and reverence for the earth.
Since you decided to write the story about a mythological character, a figure of mythology, I can only imagine that you decided to maybe keep some characteristics about this figure in your book, and to maybe change some others. So how did you manage or balance staying true to the myth, or maybe deciding to modify it, because that was of course up to you? So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, the sort of as I mentioned, sort of the elements of the Lilith story it comes from a Hebrew text called the Alphabet of Ben Sira, which is dated to around 700 to 1000 AD, or Common Era. And in that sort of text, the sort of core story of Lilith is that she and Adam are created equal. She utters the ineffable name of God, Adam is trying to compel her to sort of lie beneath him, and that's the point where she utters the ineffable name of God. She flies off to the Red Sea. The angels Samsonoi and Samangaloth come to bring her back, and Lilith refuses. So that's the sort of the core sort of element of that myth, which I have kept in my version. And some other elements from that story I've kept as well, which is that the idea that the names of those three angels can ward Lilith away. There are lots of there's been sort of lots of archaeological discoveries of people sort of writing tablets to try and ward Lilith away. And that's just across the Middle East in Iraq. So it's something that I've kept. I've kept the idea that she steals babies. And when babies laugh, it was said that it's because Lilith is tickling their feet. I've kept that element, but I've twisted it around. And the idea that she comes and seduces men at night and she steals their seed, this sort of male fear of the female seductress who will sort of, turn up in the middle of the night and compel them to have sex against their will. I have taken those elements and kind of twisted them around a bit. But really, from the moment that Lilith and Adam and Eve all leave paradise, that's where sort of my story starts, my new story. And I should mention as well, actually, that sort of outside of the sort of core myth of Lilith as well, that for a long time, when in sort of medieval art and early Renaissance art, whenever the devil, as the snake is represented, during these periods, it's very common to represent that figure with a woman's head, whether that's Lilith or some other sort of, female demonic figure, is not clear. And especially so Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel shows a Lilith figure trying to seduce Eve. So that is also something that I've kept in my story, that it's Lilith who tempts Eve with the fruit that she must not eat. But from the end of part one, that goes into my story, and what my story is about is Lilith's plan to reinstate Ashra to be, who is the mother goddess, the missing mother goddess. She's discovered, what's happened to her. She has a plan that she's going to reinstate her. She is motivated by this need for vengeance against the male god who has, chucked her out of paradise, who sided with Adam over her, who sided with Adam that he must be superior to her. So that's sort of my story, and the book is in sort of 5 parts because it spans such a long time period. It starts in 4004 BC and it ends up in the modern day. It's in 5 parts, and each part takes in a different historical era. And the part 2, we take a detour into ancient Sumer, and that really was because I wanted to link in, the origins of Lilith in Sumerian myth. So I wanted to sort of, nod to that origin of her. But really, the sort of the after story, when you sort of talk about Lilith now, most people would, I think, imagine the demonic aspect of her. She appears in sort of quite a lot of modern TV series and modern culture. She is presented as this sort of, demonic figure to be feared. And really, that's something I didn't want to go with. I wanted to get away from that, because really that's the propaganda of patriarchy. She's the original equal woman. She's sort of presented as this demonic figure because she dares to demand equality. I wanted to present her as not the demonic archetype. I wanted to present her as the equal woman, the original woman, the woman who refuses subordination. And she's dangerous and feared for that reason. That's why she's feared in a patriarchal society, because she represents a huge risk to men. But for women, she's a heroine. She is going. In my story, I want her to be the savior of women. I want her to be, as she was intended, the mother of all mankind. So that's why I shifted away from the demonic aspect somewhat.
Yeah, and also she, I don't know how to say it, but she's portrayed differently, as in she's a strong and complex character, but I love the way that she decides to leave paradise. That's she knows what she wants to do. She wants to discover what happened and so on, but she also falls in love. She lives her life, and despite of what other people might say about her, as you said, she's portrayed as some sort of woman that seduces man, but she stays true to her man the whole book. And also I love the way she defends herself, when she kind of gets replaced by Eve when she is not behaving the way she's supposed to be. Yeah. But she keeps saying that she is the original one, and I love that. That was really a strong characterization about her, and I love that. But apart from that, I know you must have done a lot of research to actually write down this book, not only about characters, which I know it must be a lot, but also about the environment, the setting. Because as you said, the book goes throughout a lot of epochs and also settings and places. So how did you actually approach this kind of research? Like what did you base your research on, and so on?
Well, I was writing this book throughout lockdown, which meant that my options were really quite limited in how I did this research. And it was really tough because, as I've said, this covers, 6,000 years of history. It covers lots of different places. So the research was tough, and I was limited to information that I could get, on the internet or in books that I could order, because all the libraries were closed. I couldn't do what I usually do, which is go to the British Library where you have, the world's knowledge at your fingertips. So I couldn't do that. So really, the sources that I used to research all the locations and the different epochs were really those, and I'm quite fortunate really that a lot of sort of ancient sources are digitized, so you can get hold of them. And the Bible itself is a huge, there's so much in there. That really was this, really, really crucial book for me for the research. I have this really sort of old book called The Bible is History, which actually I found in my grandparents' shelves years ago. And that's a sort of a fascinating book because it sort of treats biblical stories as history, and it looks into the historical era, and it's sort of a lot of description. So that was a very useful book. So for the each section is slightly different. For the ancient Sumer section, I used a lot of the Sumerian myths. The Epic of Gilgamesh. The beautiful, beautiful poems and hymns to the goddess Inanna, and these give such a wonderful sort of sense of what is important to those people. You can sort of tell through myth and the things that they talk about, the language that they use gives a really brilliant sense of what is important to that culture. So that was, I used that a lot, down to the idea of, the bangles that a priestess would wear, the adornments that a priestess would have, that she would have a hip dagger, all of these things. There's a beautiful hymn to Inanna in which she says that her teeth could crush flint. And, that sort of gives a really good sort of idea of, the power and, the power that the people held these female deities in once upon a time. So I used a lot of that. I used a lot of ancient sources like Josephus, the Jewish historian of the 1st century, ancient Greek sources, Pausanias and Strabo, Greek geographer, who describes a lot of the locations in the book. So, when I'm describing ancient Greece and Anatolia, I've used a lot of the descriptions. They're really, really precise. They sort of, to the point of describing the mountains surrounding a town. So I've used a lot of those descriptions. So all the parts of the book when I'm describing ancient Jerusalem and Ephesus and Corinth, the unloading of spices at Corinth that would come in from the east, the almond-scented Damascus and Antioch, and pine-scented Pinara in Anatolia. These all come from those very, very ancient sources. Even Homer, there's a part in the book where Lilith seeks out the oracles, and sort of those descriptions are taken from Homer as well. So that's sort of how I did the research for those aspects of the book. And sort of in terms of the challenges that I had to overcome in something like that, over such a huge, vast sort of time period, I had to sort of find a way to deal with the language, because the language is very, very, very difficult, because we start in this sort of very fantastical setting and we come up to the modern day, and I used the date of 4004 BC as the date of the creation of the Garden of Eden. That comes from James Ussher, who was a Church of Ireland Archbishop in the 16th century. So, and he calculated this, a long time ago. So I used that date. It's a sort of a date that's commonly given. So I wanted to start it in 4004 BC. But then it's complicated because the story wasn't written then, obviously. The story really was written down, in the first millennium BC and edited into its final form around sort of 500 BC. So sort of dealing with the way the timeline was really, really complicated, because you've got sort of estimates for when Noah's flood was, for example. And then after that, we come into the historical era and we have much more sort of precise dating, and it became a bit easier. But the sheer length of the novel, covering 6,000 years over a sort of a range of places, was really difficult to do, a real challenge. It was a lockdown project, really, and it occupied me for the whole of lockdown, so it worked.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, like, how long did it take you to write down the whole of it? Yeah, I imagine that would be like a lot of work.
It took about 3. I had started it before lockdown, but I hadn't really sort of got into the meat of it until pretty much, right at the beginning of March 2020. That's when I started sort of focusing on it full time. So it did take sort of 3 years to write.
But was it helpful for you? Not for the research, of course, but like for the time, was it like helpful for you to be in lockdown?
Was it, helpful? Do you know what I think it was? I didn't feel like that at the time, but I think it was because this is a really complicated book, and it's about things that I think very deeply about and have done for a very long time. And I think that sort of isolation really helped that process. It sort of gave me the freedom to really, really go deep into this story, deep into the research, and deep into a lot of self-reflection about what I think it's about, what I think is important. So that sort of isolation, I wasn't on my own, I've got 3 children, so I was homeschooling as well throughout the day. But that sort of sense of isolation from the outside world, I think, did play a huge part. I don't think I could have written this book in a sort of normal time, because I think that sort of, it gave me a lot of freedom to write it.
Yeah. So since, as we said, like we mentioned before, Lilith is a very controversial character in mythology. So when you decided to write this book and you decided to characterize her differently, as she's portrayed normally and we're used to see her as, did you, like, I don't know how to say it, but like, did you expect some kind of reactions from, I know that the book is not out yet, so not everyone has read it, but like some people like me have, and I've seen personally some reviews about it, so I know some people have read it, have the chance to read it. What kind of reactions were you expecting writing this kind of character, which is so controversial, and the way you portrayed it was also controversial because many reasons. So tell us about it.
When I was writing it, I knew the religious aspect of the book, I knew was controversial. As I say, I was sort of locked away in lockdown. I didn't really sort of, I knew what I was writing was quite controversial from a religious perspective, but I didn't really sort of think about it too much. I thought, this is the book I want to write. I know it's not going to go down with everyone. A lot of people aren't going to like it. That's fine. It would be impossible to write without offending people. So, I'm offended by things all the time. It's okay for people to be offended. I'm offended by the original story. I'm offended by the original story that casts woman as this dangerous, gullible, sort of source of all sin. So I'm offended by that story. So it's fine. So I felt, I didn't really think too much about it. But what has, as you mentioned, what did surprise me actually was not really the reaction to the religious aspects of the book. Although there have been responses to that, as I expected. But what has surprised me is the reaction to people not liking the idea of writing Lilith in a different way to the way they were expecting. And I suppose by that they mean they were expecting the demonic version of Lilith, which is the sort of most popular expression of her character. And I think that's really, really interesting, because it kind of shows that people are wedded to their own sort of particular interpretation. And they do get quite upset if they are confronted with other people's interpretations. And what's fascinating about it to me is that you kind of expect it with religion. You expect people to have a very dogmatic approach. You expect them to get upset if they see something presented that isn't the orthodox story. But with myth, that's interesting, because that's, you know, the way myths work is that they are told for, you know, in the oral tradition for hundreds, if not thousands of years before they're set down. You know, there is no one version of a myth. Myths are told in different ways, in different times and places. They evolve over time, they change. You know, the archetype of Lilith, as I've mentioned, is 5,000 years old. There is no one Lilith. You know, there are lots of different interpretations of that archetype, of that story. So yeah, I found that surprising. You know, I read. The reason that I like reading is that I like to read other people's interpretations of things. I don't go in to expect my own sort of thoughts reflected back at me, because what would be the point? You know, you should write. If you only want to see your own version, you should write your own story. So, you know, that's why I read. I read to find out other people's interpretations. So I find it fascinating that people are kind of wedded to a really sort of their version, the orthodox version, and not other interpretations, that they're not sort of open to sort of different stories. Yeah, I find that surprising, but that's what happens when you write a book. You know, people have different reactions to it and different interpretations, and that's all good. That's all expected.
Yeah, but I think, like, personally for me, it is amazing how you and other like women have started writing down about like characters that have been told differently in mythology. Like, for example, I can think about Circe by Madeline Miller, or Clytemnestra, that I know you read. And I find, yeah, me too. And I find it like amazing how we're starting just now to portraying women differently than what we're used to, like, here. Like, you know, when I think about Circe, I think about not a demonic way, as you say about Lilith, but like still not a good person. And Clytemnestra as well, I was told, like, my whole life I knew she was a bad woman. But I love how we're starting to retelling this, and we're starting to support women more, and I love it. It's just so cool, and I hope this, like, people keep doing that, because it gives us another perspective that I think we need.
Yes, definitely. And I think a lot of the time these are stories that were told by men, and so they are versions of women that have been told by men, and they are seen through a male perspective. So that's why it's great to read women providing their own perspective now. You know, and that, like you, I loved Clytemnestra. I thought it was a beautiful book, and her humanity shines, you know, in that book in a way that is missing from the myth that was told by men for so long. So yeah, I agree. I think, and some of these myth retellings, some of them have taken sort of completely new departures, and I love that, you know. And I've seen the same response to some of them. Some readers getting upset with the sort of new departures or a new take on it, and I've seen that a few times, and it surprises me, because that's what I love about it. That's why I like reading myth. The whole point is that it's a retelling. You know, you wouldn't want to read the same story over and over again. You want to read a new version, a new take, a new version of it.
The fact that Lily encounters various historical and mythological characters figures during the story and her journey. So what were the main challenges in creating these encounters and make them happen? And how, like, did you use this character to support the main plot? Because we know that a lot of things happen in the book.
Well, I think, you know, that as you say, she meets so many people, you know, throughout this book. But the real sort of difficulties the ones that I found most difficult to write, really Lilith's relationship with God. You know, that's the first one, because the god of this novel is the antagonist, and he's not the god that you might imagine today. You know, I think most people have a concept of God. If they think they have a god, they think of God as a figure of compassion and mercy, love. But the God who is the antagonist in my novel is the God as he is written in the Bible, in the Old Testament in particular. And he is a very different character, in my opinion. He's very, he is plainly misogynist, as we can see from the start of Genesis. He is very authoritarian. He behaves in a sort of a strangely narcissistic way. His concerns for much of the Old Testament are that he is worshipped in a particular way. He is a very narcissistic character, and that is the antagonist in my novel. So it's very difficult to write that yourself. I was conscious that I was on a very, very narrow line of potentially offending people all the time, but I needed to sort of stay true to that concept of God as my antagonist, because that's what I was writing about. I was writing about the idea of God being a sole male entity without a female balance. That concept of a deity as male without any female. That's what I was writing about. That loss of partnership, that loss of balance, that loss of harmony. That's what I was writing about. And so again, that's mirrored again later on when Lilith, she never encounters Jesus, but she does encounter Mary Magdalene, who in my book is Jesus, and Jesus is called Yeshua in my book, the Aramaic name, Yeshua's partner. And again, that's a very difficult line to write. I wrote that section maybe 3 or 4 times. It changed completely every time. I had to keep redoing it because I wasn't happy with it. And again, the main thing that I wanted to communicate in that section was this loss of partnership. And although that idea of Maryam and Yeshua as being partners, equal partners in this enterprise, I understand will be upsetting and shocking for some people, there are sort of ancient scriptures that support that idea, and that's really what I wanted to go into. And the inspiration for this whole part of the book is the Gnostic Gospels, which are these ancient scriptures that were discovered. They were around in the earliest years of the Christian era. They became heretical in about the 3rd century AD, and the versions that we have were buried sometime around the 3rd century AD in Egypt at Nag Hammadi, and these were uncovered in the 20th century, and they revealed a completely different picture of Christianity, of Jesus, and particularly of Mary Magdalene, than we are used to. And I find them absolutely fascinating because they're very varied. They don't sort of portray one version. They portray lots of sort of different ideas, but very different ideas to the ideas in the New Testament. And one of the ideas that is communicated in the Gnostic Gospels is this idea that Jesus was preaching the wisdom of the lost mother, that Jesus is the representative of the female divine figure, not a father figure, which is absolutely fascinating to me. And that's really what sort of supplied the inspiration for this part of the novel. And the idea that Maryam and Yeshua are sort of together, that kind of reflects really ancient ideas of the idea of the sacred marriage, the eros gamos, the idea of a sort of goddess and a mortal man in partnership. That's a really, really ancient idea. And some people have interpreted, that's what's going on with Jesus and Maryam as well. So that was the model for what is going on in my book. It's hugely, hugely difficult to write. But it was really, really important to me because that is the core of the book. That partnership is the partnership that is reflected throughout the book. It's what my book is yearning for, that partnership between men and women, which is when men decided there was a sole male God. That's, when we lost that idea of partnership. At the beginning of the book, you have Yahweh and Asherah who are in partnership. You have Adam and Lilith who should have been in partnership until Adam decided he was going to take over. And then you have Yeshua and Maryam, and that sort of that idea of the partnership between male and female, which is mirrored throughout the book, was really important to me. So that's why that's why I wrote it that way.
Yeah, and also when you talk about God being the antagonist, I think you kind of like did a job of reversing roles, as in with the like angels that like for me they were more like demons, because it was like a little bit scary as well. The way they were trying to do whatever was in their power to do what God wanted them to do. And I think, speaking of reversing things, a very fascinating concept for me was the tree of knowledge, because it was like portrayed completely like differently than what I've been told or what I've read about. So how did you come up with that idea? It was like really, really amazing.
Well, I think, when we think about the tree of knowledge, I think the way it's sort of traditionally represented, it provides knowledge of good and evil. And, you can interpret that as meaning everything, because, good and evil are opposites. It's knowledge of everything. It's linked to the idea of sex, because before Adam and Eve eat from the tree, they don't know they're naked. They eat from the tree, they realize they're naked. It's like self-awareness, knowledge that they're naked, and sort of the knowledge of that sex is somehow their sex, and having sex is somehow sinful. It is sometimes described about being, bringing death and sin into the world, which kind of doesn't make sense the more you think about it. And the other aspect of it is that it's sort of a metaphor really for humans desiring to be like gods. It's like an overreach, sort of arrogance, that they want to have this knowledge that gods have. So those are sort of the aspects of it that I think we sort of traditionally think of. What I wanted to sort of get at, really, and I'm not the first person at all to sort of link the idea of the tree of knowledge being linked to a mother goddess, because really that sort of link is much, much older than the story of Genesis. Is much older than the story of the Garden of Eden. In the Near East, the idea of a mother goddess pictured as a tree is thousands and thousands of years old. She's the source of life. She's the source of all nourishment. Her body, as mothers nourish their babies, a tree provides nourishment to all the creatures who eat from it. And so you see this image of a sort of a tree representing, a mother goddess. That's ancient, very, very old. So I'm not the first person to sort of make that link at all. But really what I wanted to get at is what the idea of the tree of knowledge sort of shows us about this God. If God is the sole creator, why has he put a tree in the garden that you're not allowed to eat? Why does he want to separate humans from the tree of life? That's how that episode ends. He, expels Adam and Eve because he doesn't want them to eat from the tree of life and live forever, as he says. That's all absolutely fascinating, because it kind of hints at more going on there than we have traditionally thought about. So I wanted to turn that around, and I wanted, the tree of knowledge and the tree of life became the mother's gifts that the jealous father wants to deny his children. I think the existence of the tree of knowledge and of the tree of life both indicate really that this father is not the sole God, because otherwise they just wouldn't be there. If he's the sole person in charge of creation, they wouldn't be there. And he kind of gives the game away himself. In Genesis 3:22, when God says, "Behold, the man has become like one of us to know good or evil," and that kind of gives away the game that there wasn't just one God. There were once more gods. So I wanted to return to the original symbolism of that story, which is what the people who heard it in the first millennium BC would have completely understood. The idea that these symbols, the symbol of the fruit, the symbol of the tree, symbolize the mother goddess. They would have understood that. They would have understood the symbolism of the snake. The snake is a very, very ancient symbol of wisdom, of foresight, and it was always associated with female goddesses. So they would have understood all of those symbols that I think have been not lost, but sort of hidden, obscured to us today. And so that's what I wanted to get back to. I wanted to get back to the idea that these are the gifts of the mother. This is the wisdom that she wanted to give her children, the wisdom of the natural world, that we're part of it, that we will live and die as all creatures do. So in sort of hence in that way, it's not, what Adam and Eve are learning from the tree of knowledge is not, they didn't bring death into the world, but they bring knowledge of death. And that's really important because it's about regeneration. The mother goddess is a goddess of regeneration rather than eternal life, on a spiritual plane, regeneration in the physical world. So that's what I wanted to do. And I wanted to really draw attention to the reasons for this story, the story in Genesis, the reason for the misogyny in that story, because the whole point of the story is about sort of erasing the idea of the female creative principle. Why? Why is that necessary? And the reason it's necessary is to establish the idea of male supremacy, and you're sort of erasing this idea of the female creative principle, erasing the idea of female divinity. So when God says you must not eat from this tree, what he's saying is you must not listen, you must not follow the wisdom of the goddess. When he says to Adam, why have you heeded the voice of your wife? He's saying, from now on, you will not listen to women. Women will not have authority. Man is in power now. And when he sends Adam and Eve away from the garden, and he says, lest they eat from the tree of life and live forever, he is separating mankind from this mother goddess whose power is regeneration. So the living forever is about regeneration. So, those are not ideas that are new to this book at all. They're things that have been pointed out by feminists, by biblical scholars, many, many times over the past sort of, 40 years at least, not long ago. Gerda Lerner writes about this in her fantastic book, The Creation of Patriarchy. So these are not new ideas, but I wanted to really, really focus on them in this book and draw attention to it, because I think it's really lost. I think we sort of gloss over this story as though it's just it is a myth, but it is a myth with such immense power because it was taught as fact for 2,500 years. It's a myth that had the power to sort of really it didn't start patriarchy, but it has the power to reinforce male supremacy. This myth had such immense power over women's lives for so long, and that's really what I wanted to talk about in this book.
Yeah, one thing that I kind of find funny about men in your book is that they don't question stuff. So when God says you are the superior one, they just say they are, okay, I am the superior one, but they don't question it. They don't even think about why am I the superior one? She is equal to me. And that's really interesting. But that sort of resumes everything about men. And I think
if you're told that you have all the power, you're not going to question it because it works in your favor. And that's the point of this story. The point of this story is that it is written by and for men. It's written to make it clear that men are in charge and men have power, and that women are inferior. That's the point of it. So you're not going to turn that down if it's offered to you.
Yeah, but also Lilith, the whole point of her journey is not to claim that she's superior, that female are superior, but that equality is what she's striving for, and that's what really matters. And that just sets the differences between the mother goddess and God, because he's always striving for men's power, while on the other side we have equality. So that's really different.
Yeah.
So as you're saying, this is a really powerful myth and retelling in this case. So how do you feel about the potential impact of Lilith on readers? I know it's coming out in October. I just want to repeat it so people know. but like it can also impact like contemporary discussions of women's rights, because these are like the main focuses that we have in the book, main topics. So women's rights, gender equality, and even the reevaluation of mythological narratives, because that's what we're doing basically. And so what are your hopes for the novel and the message it conveys?
Well, I would really love it if it sparked conversations about misogyny in religion. For me, that's one of the reasons why religion must be kept separate from law, from the state. I would like people to reflect on how foundational that misogyny is, and how it was there at the heart of all of our institutions, the law, education. That for 2,500 years, when all of these institutions were being created, this idea was treated as fact. The idea that God is male, that man has power over women. And the story of the Garden of Eden was used to justify witch hunting, for hundreds of years. Just as Eve was susceptible to the devil, so it was thought all women are, and that's why women, that was their justification for targeting women during the medieval witch hunts. That story has been used to prevent. It was certainly used to prevent women having any power, any say, or any power in the church. You have in the New Testament, you have St. Paul saying that he will not allow women to have any authority over a man. That story was used to deny women education, any sort of equal role in society for so long, and that is the way our culture developed. On that model of male supremacy and a father creating without a mother. So I think that's what I would like people to sort of reflect on, and I would like people to reflect on the consequences in the world that we have inherited as a consequence of that. And I think most clearly you can see that in the limitations on women's reproductive rights, especially in America, but elsewhere in the world. I think you can see it in the way that women politicians are treated. This idea that women are not natural leaders, that they shouldn't have power. I think sort of throughout the whole of Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, I think you could see a lot of those ideas that are still there. There's always something wrong with women leaders. They talk the wrong way, they're wearing the wrong clothes, they're too aggressive or not aggressive enough. They're held to a completely different standard from men. And I think that is sort of a consequence of everything that we've been talking about. So I would really like to sort of spark conversations about that. In terms of sort of what it means for retellings, I would love to see more biblical retellings. I would love to see more retellings of religious stories, because they are other as well. Much of the Bible is myths, and it's contemporaneous with Greek myth, with other myths from that region, and yet it's kind of treated in a different way. It's kind of treated as religion, but religion is the same thing as myth. For the ancient Greeks, 3,000 years ago, what we think of as Greek myth was their religion, and the same is true today. Religion is myth with power. It's with the backup of the state. So I would really like to see more sort of biblical and other religious myths being told from the point of view of the people who weren't there the first time round, the point of view of the women who weren't given a say when these myths were first told. I would love to see that, because I think there's so many fascinating stories that could be retold from different perspectives, well, not just women's perspectives, but from the perspectives of so many people who didn't have that power the first time round. So I would love that to be a consequence.
I'd love that too, also because I told you this was my first biblical retelling. So I found it really, really, really interesting, and I'd love to read more. So yeah, and I love retellings in general. So this was kind of a new perspective for me, and yeah, that's it. So I want to say like congratulations on the publishing of your book, which is amazing, and I can't wait for it to be out so I can also buy the physical copy. And thank you so much for joining me today to this conversation, which I really love talking to you.
Oh, well, Georgia, thank you so much for having me, and I really loved talking to you. And thank you so much for your questions, which have really made me reflect and think about my book again. So thank you so much. I've really enjoyed speaking to you.